Lori stared lazily at her alarm clock as her hand slipped off the sleep button. Her eyes had small bags under them to showcase the sleepiness still in her body, or the lack of it. Since flopping onto the bed, the oldest sibling had barely gotten any rest. Part of it was due to the guilt, that unsettled feeling that pooled in her stomach all night. The part of being that she tried to figure out how to salvage the damage she caused. Instead, all she could think about was how messed up not only her chance of reconnecting with her brother, but most likely for her sisters as well. On top of that, she feared Lincoln may have lost whatever confidence he had in handling a situation like this on his own. Getting up, Lori rubbed the dead skin from her eyes. At least he didn't scream or throw stuff at me to leave. I was trying to kill him. She mauled herself with it swinging her feet over the edge of the bed. She sat still, staring down at her feet as her body slowly awoke itself. Last time I handled him like that, he might have only been intimidated for a minute, before getting upset or just forgetting about it. Last night. She didn't like recalling about that short memory, but he looked at the brother's eyes when she held them so easily to read. I guess he didn't think I was going to kill him. She made a sorrowful frown, but being viewed as a school bully and threatening to pummel him for such money is no better. Lori breathed in deep before exhaling, then leaned back slightly and pushed herself off her bed. Her feet shuffled along the carpet, which made her very way to the door, mentally preparing herself for that line that no doubt formed while she was in the midst of reflecting on her actions. Upon entering the door, though, Lori found 7 pairs of irate eyes looking at her, whose bodies were very much connected to also block the door. Lori started, only being pushed back inside her room as the girls entered, shutting the door behind them. You want to explain what the flipping H happened last night? Lynn asked with her clear-eyed tear in her tone. I saw this coming, Lori groaned in awkwardly. Look, I know I made a mistake, Lori responded. She sounded almost insecure due to the fatigue she still felt. Yeah, no duh, the younger girl pressed. But what exactly did she say made you fly off the handle? Lynn tapped her foot in irritation. Lori knotted her brows together. Since you and everyone else were snooping, what else do you think he did? We wouldn't be asking if we knew, ding-dong, Lola butted in. The oldest sibling pinched the bridge of her eyes. It's too early in the morning for this. Breathing in, Lincoln said some things that were truthful. She folded her arms, averting her gaze from her sisters. But it still hurt. Kids! Everyone froze upon hearing their father's voice in the hallway. We're leaving. Bye. Have a good day. Lynn Sr. peeked around the second floor from his position at the stairs, visibly cringing at the fact at the moment, since he noticed all the doors were still closed. Maybe I shouldn't have said that so loud, he muttered, scanning around the doors, hoping that he didn't interrupt their sleep. Upon looking towards the right, he noticed the door of his son's room was ajar slightly. Curiosity spiking, the Powderidge walked over to the hall to the room. You up, sport? Lynn Sr. asked, gently pushing the door open. To his surprise, Lincoln wasn't there. The bed was neatly made, and a couple of hangers were missing from their clothing. A quick look around let Lynn knew that the boy's backpack was also missing. Did he leave early again? He glanced around, scratching his head, before he noticed some papers were on Lincoln's desk. Picking them up, the father then found them to be drawings of some characters performing their actions. Some of the pictures themselves were surrounded by thick borders, as if they were arranged in sequence. Huh? This one looks like one of those comics that Lincoln reads. Taking a closer look, the father identified his son's wearing. He scratched his head. Was it a disguise of some sort? He appeared to be thinking on something important as he walked down his path. Looking over the other pictures, Lynn Sr. also identified who he assumed to be Clyde and another girl he wasn't familiar with. Lynn Sr. held the picture close to his face. Is that Lily? He pictured how his youngest child would look like in a few years. The mental image he came up with was the girl that looked similar to Lenny, but with shorter hair and maybe a tooth or to Miss McLean, and maybe that one tuft of hair sticking out. If he or Rita didn't try to mat it down to her head, like Lincoln does whenever he wants to dress fancy. Tried as they might, they could never get that cowlick to stay down during the boy's younger years. The same result occurred with Lola as well. Maybe it was genetic? Albert certainly has one, even at his old age. Lynn? The family man fidgeted when he heard Rita calling. Coming, he responded. After flicking through the papers, a little smile grew on the man's face. The drawings were very well detailed. It was cartoony for sure, but it reflected the vibe off of those early cartoon action shows Lynn used to watch when he was a kid. It looks like we got an artist in the family. Putting the papers neatly back on the desk, Lynn turned around and exited the room. As he came downstairs, Hey Rita, do you know where Lincoln might have gone? He's not in his room or in the bathroom. He left early for school, Rita called. Lynn raised a brow. How'd you figure that out? He asked, upon reaching the bottom steps. Rita came out of the room with the sheet of paper in hand. She was already dressed in her dental scrubs, holding it up. It read, Left early for school. Sorry I didn't tell you yesterday. Lincoln. Lynn Sr. looked outside. The sun had been barely above risen over the trees, offering some daylight, but not enough to where it cast long shadows on tall objects. Not sure if it's a good idea for him to leave so early. I don't think it is either. But he isn't really to be around all the girls yet, Rita stated with a frown, much less ride in the van with them. Lynn Sr. sighed. I hope he might be able to soon. He opened the front door. I know we made due to transportation by having the kids taking the bus, but riding the van makes it easier. He stepped out. Rita followed. She left a note sitting on the coffee room living room table. Plus, we don't have to worry if the kids miss their ride, but using the van makes it easier. I know, Rita nodded, but the last thing we need is Lincoln getting a heart attack or, she bit her lip, trying to jump out of the van while it's moving. Upstairs, the girls had heard the front door shut, the van turning over, and seconds later, followed by the rolling of tires. Luna leaned against the wall. Sis, we're all in the same boat, right? If he just told you off of something, you know it's true. She folded her arms as a scowl formed. I'm just thinking you melted under the pressure. Lori scowled at the musician. It's not that I lost my cool when he called me out for being a terrible sister. She pointed at herself. I already knew that. She folded her arms. But I knew I lost it when he thought I really didn't love Bobby. Given how disgusting it was seeing the both of you ogling at each other, I find it hard to believe that you don't love him, Lucy stated. Well, I do think Lincoln had a point, Lynn started, both her hands resting on her hips. You didn't exactly grab your BF's attention the usual way. Lori stared at Lynn with a quizzical but suspicious stare. What are you talking about? Lynn only increased the intensity of her glare. Does being a bully for attention ring any bells? Lori visibly flinched as she stared in great surprise at the jock, wondering how Lynn would have known such information. The only people who should have known and been aware were herself, Carol, and Bobby. Of course, she hadn't mentioned a bit of jealousy and history to Dr. Lopez. The rest of the girls exchanged confused looks at the jock. Back when we first found out Ronnie Ann was picking on Lincoln, I cornered her at school and forced her the truth out of her. The other girls started to give her the stink eye, to which Lynn just gave a roll of her eyes. No, I didn't beat her up, obviously. I was close, though, when she finally spilled why she was picking on her bro. Pointing at Lori. Miss Queen of No here pulled the same stunts just to get her brother's attention. Lynn folded her arms. So, of course, she made it think it was perfectly fine. Lisa rubbed her chin. It didn't seem like out of the ordinary that you suddenly announced that you had a significant other. She then gave a light shrug. Although it's possible you could have been hiding your affair, much to how Lincoln hides his feelings with Ronnie Ann. Lana looked towards the young prodigy. They're still dating? Lori sighed. Okay, yes, I did prank Bobby just to grab his attention back then. I'm not exactly a dating expert per se. You sure felt like you were, Lynn grumbled. Lori glared at the brunette, but opted to continue her point instead of cutting loose with an insult. But I really did love him. It may not have been at first, but I did grow into being his girlfriend. She reflected on what Carol told her yesterday. I broke up with him when this mess started because I felt like he wouldn't want to be with someone like me after what I did to Lincoln. But a friend told me that it might have not been the best option either. She then fiddled with one of her stray locks. At this point, I don't even know what to do anymore. I thought I could try and smooth things over with Lincoln, and look what happened. That's because you didn't wait. Lenny spoke up. The girls turned to the second oldest sibling, who was still sitting on her bed. Lincoln came to me when he wanted to. I didn't try to seek him out. And he sat down with me earlier that day, Lynn pointed out, a scowl still on her face. I didn't want to walk over to his table and reintroduce myself like last time. Lori pursed her lips as the light glare formed on her face. Well, what do you guys want me to do? I already know I messed up, and I didn't need the rest of you reminding me of how bad it is. It's not just about you, Lori, Luann stated. Because of what happened, Lincoln might be not too scared to come near us again. Or if we're all lucky, the Jacques stated. Luna eyed on Lenny's clock. The amount of time the girls needed to get ready was diminishing quickly, and the last thing everyone needed now was to miss the bus. Point is, sis, the whole idea to get this plan was to get Lincoln feel like he was gonna come down on us, his own. We can't just barge into his life like we used to, cause he'll end up harder up than calm, and we'll never get our bro back to his old groove. She pushed herself onto the wall. You should have stopped when he made it clear that he wasn't in the mood to talk with you. Try not to force it on him to give you a chat. And whatever you like it or not, the ball is not in his court, Lynn stated, diverting her gaze to the floor, and her glare lightened. Has been since we got into this mess, looking back up at her older sister. I don't even think we can team this effort since Lincoln's just the only guy out of 11 of us. She made a hateful glare towards the young adult. But I speak for all of us when I say this. If you messed this up for the rest of us, Link's gonna have one less sister to deal with. Without another word, the hot-headed brunette brushed away past the rest of his sisters, throwing open the door before banking left, stepping into the bathroom. As the door slammed shut, the rest of the girls made a quick glance at Lori, giving a few disappointed glares before falling out of the room. Lenny watched them leave, having to move her feet off the bed and let them dangling on the floor. Glancing at her roommate, Lori just stood there with her lips pursed, with a slight glare on her face. Her head was tilted down, now casting a shadow around her eyes. The fashioness grew to know when her sisters were making hollow threats, but Lynn's certainty didn't sound like one. Did she really mean they were going to make Lori not their sister anymore? Lenny thought to herself. What's the word for it? Disown? Or were they gonna... The 16-year-old cringed a bit at the idea that came to her mind. No. They wouldn't do that to her. Lenny noticed a faint glint of light coming from Lori's cheek, moving it down and before it disappeared. You okay, Lori? Lori gave a huff. I'm fine. She turned to her closet, pulling open the door, and started sorting through her day clothes. Lenny's lips thinned into a fine line, knowing her sister was lying, while she did believe Lori should have learned some patience, especially since she told her yesterday that Lincoln had his eerie direct at her. She didn't necessarily believe that the other girls should be very quick to dismiss Lori as their oldest sibling. Hearing the door open for a moment before shutting again, Lenny looked at the bedroom door before looking at the clock. Given the enthusiastically hum, she decided to put her thoughts aside and to get ready before the bus arrived. Ronnie Ann walked towards her homeroom, a bored expression on her face with looks and other stuff, books in one hand and other stuff in her hoodie pocket. Tuesday may have not been as dreadful as Monday's, but it served as a reminder that there were 3 more days left in the week. Fortunately, this also happened to be a week that the teachers canceled classes for students on Friday due to professional development, or whatever the heck that is. This has also happened to be one of the 2 days herself, and Lincoln shared the first class of the day. A smile graced on her lips as she thought about yesterday. It still stung that Lincoln believed that she would bring harm to him, even in the slightest grievances. But she couldn't fault him for that. It was the main selling point of the tough girl persona she put forth and all, although it worked a little too well. Well, we didn't start off great, I'll say that. The tomboy shuffled the books in her hands. Maybe I should try being more not like the school me around him. She snapped her fingers. Friendlier, that's what I mean. She brought her pocket hand to her mouth. That look on his face was priceless, though, and I think he finally gets the picture. When she stepped inside of her homeroom, she quickly noticed the head of white hair that lay down on the desk. The smile on her face was now replaced with a frown before she walked over to the loud with a hand stretched out. She stopped upon noticing the head turned towards her. Hey, Clyde, Lincoln muttered before sitting up. Clyde? Ronnie Ann repeated. You okay, Lema? She stopped herself. I mean, Lincoln, you don't look like you've slept very much. Lincoln rubbed his eyes before removing a hand, realizing his mistake. Oh, sorry, Ronnie Ann, picking up half the later of her sentence. Yeah, I didn't sleep much because of... He lowered his lip and bit it. An incident. Ronnie Ann raised a brow. What do you mean? After talking with Lynn yesterday, I decided to try and work things over with Lenny. His brows furrowed a little, and I found out who really started the whole fight that led to the sister protocol thingy. Ronnie Ann gave a flat stare. Lori? She moved to her desk, which was adjacent to his. Lincoln nodded. Lenny got a head start on her shopping that day, and she used the bus to get to and from the mall. And she was already wearing the dress by the time Lori got home. He crossed his arms, so I was not in the good mood to talk to Lori when I found out, but later on, she wanted to try and make amends with me, I guess. Ronnie Ann adjusted her position to her seat. You don't sound too happy about it, she noted. Well, I wanted her just to go away because I really didn't want to talk to her, the loud huffed. But she seemed so desperate and sincere, and from the look on her face, she stuck her hand through my door, so I let her in. The rest of the class started to arrive one by one, a couple of students literally bumping into each other as it became apparent that they had been sprinting to class. Ronnie Ann stifled a chuckle as Lincoln continued. I don't know if it was a good idea, since I was still mad at her, but I got to the point where and asked her certain questions just to see if what Lenny said was true. Ronnie raised a brow. Did you try to weasel out of it? Lincoln shook his head. She told the truth, and after that, A brief overglance before his face had softened. I was reminded with every time she used her agent as an excuse to get what she wanted. All the time she thought I was going to fail at something, as if she barely had any confidence in me. And how she made us do favors for her, just to get her a ride to some place. How much of a hypocrite she was in general, forcing me to do the stuff that I didn't want to do, and how much of a control freak she was. Ronnie couldn't help but felt the irate of frown on her face, so I told her off each topic. Sounds like you had a whole mouthful to give her, the tomboy stated. I don't think I could have stopped if I wanted to, Lincoln agreed, and at some point, I started wondering if her ego was the main reason she and Bobby got together, given what you told me yesterday. And on top of that, did you know that she really has this rivalry against this girl in her school? Ronnie Ann shook her head. No? She was about to say more when Miss Johnson walked through the door. All right, class, we're going to start in 5 minutes. The red-haired teacher took a sip of her coffee as she set her teacher's book on her purse and her desk chair. I gotta run to the bathroom real quick. Be right back. She fumbled with the door before making a swift exit. But Ronnie Ann then turned to back at Lincoln. I wouldn't be surprised. I still don't know when it did, but I do start to think Lori got together with Bobby just to get a leg up on Carol, Lincoln summarized. Ronnie squinted her eyes as her brows slanted down to the bridge of between her eyes. So you're really saying that she was just using my bro? Lincoln started to feel a little nervous upon seeing Ronnie Ann becoming quite agitated, but did his best not to show it. Yeah, he cringed a little of how timid she sounded, and it seemed like she finally pushed her over the top. How so? Lincoln bit his lower lip. She grabbed me by the collar and lifted me up in the air. Wait. Ronnie cut him off, staring at him with a shocked but angry look. So she tried to hit you? Just because you were telling the truth? She yelled out. Several of her students looked at their directions due to the noise. The tomboy responded with a wordless glare, making it flinch before they hurriedly laid eyes on the blackboard, glancing back at Lincoln. Ronnie Ann took notice of his semi-poker face. Dang it, I'm doing it again. Her gaze softened as she looked towards the ground. I'm sorry, she muttered. It's fine, Lincoln replied with a quiet voice. I thought she was going to beat me up after getting her angry, but instead she let me go. He took a moment to compose himself. Lori said that she really did love Bobby and broke it off with him because she knew that he wouldn't want to be with her when he found out what happened to me, and because she messed up our relationship. He patted himself on the chest, and she didn't try to argue against everything else I said about her. How did you feel? Ronnie Ann asked as she stared at his eyes. I don't even think you're chill with just letting your sisters touch you. She then adverted her gaze towards the irritation swelled in her eyes. Much less handle you like that. After a moment, she raised an eyebrow and she looked at him. Actually, I'm surprised you're not even flinching or thinking they're gonna out to get you. Lincoln scrunched up his lip, to which Ronnie realized how that sounded. No offense. To be honest, Lincoln started, leaning back towards a seat, with an arm over the back of his chair. I was scared right out of my mind last night when she grabbed me like that. He looked to the ceiling. But when I thought about it, Lori knew of the stuff I said about her, and she admitted I was right about everything. She thinks everything is pretty much her fault, which it kinda is, he huffled. But she learned a while ago that she put her social status above everything else. It basically made the rest of us felt like second place in her mind. Ronnie Ann rolled her eyes as she crossed her arms. Not really a good excuse. Just 'cause she's older than everyone else doesn't mean she can act like a total B-word to everyone around her. Bobby never acted like that towards me. She glanced over at the front of the class. Reminds me of those fat-headed preppy girls here. True, Lincoln glanced at her, but you don't have 10 siblings. Blaines, pretty much. He sat up straight in his chair. Not saying that I can agree with her, but I understand where Lori was coming from. The tomboy gave a side glance to him. From where? You said yourself that your sisters aren't that annoying, unless Luann with her pranks or Lola since she's so stuck up and wears that stupid gown all day. Before Lincoln could reply, quick footsteps echoed through the door before the owner popped in. Phew, sorry about that, class. Miss Johnson patted her stomach. Those wings from last night went right through me. She then kicked the door shut with her heel before she walked back to her desk. Now, who remembers what we covered last class? One of the kids raised their hands. Something about volcanoes? Yes, Miss Johnson nodded, turning to the board. And more especially, she picked up the chalk and began tracing several lines over along the blank space. Not gonna lie, kinda wish we had the whiteboard, she muttered before finishing up. Stepping away from the board, the children saw a crude image of a typical hollowed-out volcano, showing the throat and what many assumed to be magma chambers sitting at the bottom. The inner mechanisms of one. Turning to the class. And can anyone guess what exactly causes a volcano to explode? Several of the students raised their hands, including Lincoln and Ronnie Ann. Angie's had a finger scanning for the crowd before suddenly pointing at one of the students. Yes, Ronnie Ann? Too much pressure? The tomboy answered. Correct. The teacher tapped the chamber with her chalk. There's actually several reasons why these things explode, but it boils down to gas pressure. The balancing of the magma is in the chamber, and the magma filling the chamber, which will cause it to level. She then drew a couple of upwards towards the chamber and to the throat. To rise, think as if you were holding a bottle of soda in your hand and you happen to shake it too much. Angie then turned towards the other students. If you try popping the top suddenly, you'll make your drink shoot out all over the place in a similar fashion. This is what occurs inside the volcano when gas is pressured. She pointed at the chamber, rises too rapidly, and suddenly a change of a huge introduction of easier following magma into the chamber. With little else to go, this pressure and magma will rapidly rise to the surface in a huge explosion if it doesn't get up. She then waved her arms for dramatic effect, which discussing the explosive details. However, not all interruptions would look like a bomb going off. As Miss Johnson started going into detail about volcano explosive index, Lincoln then turned to Ronnie Ann. One time when Mom and Dad went on a date, Lori was in charge. I managed to stand up a group against her, he whispered, to which Ronnie Ann glanced at him. I learned that quickly that my sisters can be pretty chaotic when they're left alone, and by that, I mean the house was a total mess in 5 minutes. The tomboy raised both eyebrows in surprise. When I try to get any of them under control, I actually get why Lori had to pull her Queen of No attitude. I tried being nice, and the girls just walked over me. It got to the point where I imitated Lori for a moment before they locked me up too. Ronnie Ann bit her cheek. I'm guessing your parents were surprised to find the dump when they got back. Surprisingly, the only thing they found was a bent golf club. Ronnie Ann squinted her eye in confusion. I sprung Lori loose and then she helped me out. It's a long story. The lad stopped talking when he noticed Miss Johnson looking at their attention as she continued her lecture about how VEI 6 was continuing to draw an image of an eruption on the board. When the attention was back on the board, he continued, and when I started to wonder how long has Lori had to keep this up, I know it wasn't recently. She searched up his memories, given a light hum. I sort of remembered getting really angry during one of the babysitting moments when I was 7, I think. But further than that, I don't think she got angry at me much of anything. He scratched his head. She was like more of a mature Lenny, actually. That doesn't exactly explain why she suddenly cared about you more than the others outside her family looked at her, Ronnie Ann whispered irritably. Lincoln frowned. I don't think so. And honestly, he looked towards her. I feel bad for her. He then pulled out his phone before scrolling through the apps in a moment. In this photo gallery, he pulled up somewhat of a dark photo that was illuminated by the camera flashed. He handed his phone to Ronnie Ann, who looked at the picture. She couldn't help but visibly cringe. The photo was that of Lori when she was 13, wearing glasses, still having braces, and a face that had some blemishes here and there. Wow, she looked like a dork, the tomboy muttered. Lincoln nodded. I got to pick at it a few times because of my hair color, and I can only imagine what Lori must have went through. Ronnie Ann handed her the phone back, which he accepted. And with that in mind, it all started to make sense. Lori got teased and maybe bullied at school, having to take care of her siblings all the time when wasn't doing any favors for her, so, he sighed, she must have had enough and decided to change her attitude. He then stuffed the mobile in his pocket. I don't like what Lori did, but as I don't feel scared, as I might have been since I realized how much she ended up like this. He opened up his science book. I can't imagine having to take care of all my sisters at the same time. She furrowed his brows slightly. Although, you mean before or after they turn on you? Yeah, sometimes it makes things way more recently. Ronnie Ann whispered as she turned the page of her book. The lad's lips thinned to a thin line. Well, I guess taking care of them might have been wrong words. Solving their fights would be better. He still remembered on how he had to settle the dispute between Lynn and Lucy. It what seemed like the unspoken to-go-to person when it came to the time to resolving whatever issue the twins were fighting over. And for a while, I felt like that was the only thing I was good for. He then turned back was a comic panel that was drawing previously night before getting interrupted by his oldest sister. I don't think I finished that page the other night. He nodded to himself. I was too distracted after all that. Ronnie Ann glanced up at the board for a brief moment before staring back at her book again. If I looked at anything that Lori did in that photo, I'd get eaten alive. She then poked at the end of her ponytail with a finger that twirled around the digit. And people used to pick on me just because I had pigtails. The tomboy frowned. Still, if I can get it from my head to quit caring about what these idiots here think, then why should she make the difference of the same conclusion? Did it really make nearly berating her freaking brother near death spell it out for her? Ronnie Ann glared at the text. I doubt she would have changed otherwise. None of them would. The Santiago girl drew a breath before giving a wordless sigh. So, what are you going to do now? Lincoln glanced at her. As far as you want to do about your sisters. Lincoln scratched the top of his lip. After what happened with Lori and what nearly happened with Lynn, he muttered his last part quietly. I'm not sure if I can have a talk with any of them alone like I preferred to. Most of his older sisters were spoken to. Lynn and Lenny were something of a non-issue in his mind, even counting the near setback with Lori. As understanding as he was of her plight, the tomboy had hardly trusted her, but as she still left Luann with unpredictable nature, as well as unpredictable as far as whatever or not she might have some sort of prank ready. Lincoln could always count on her to make sure the same to make a lame pun as best. And there was Luna. Chill as they might intentionally believed in her to be, Luna was still prone to outbursts if they poked the wrong way. And there was still no plan he had made with his younger siblings. Didn't you went to a therapist yet or something? The tomboy asked, sparing him from his glance. Lincoln then blinked his eyes to his surprise before his eyes opened up more. He placed down his forehead. Duh, why didn't I think of that? I've been so wrapped up with trying to deal with this on my own I forgot Miss Lopez was still an option. Placing his hand down. I did. I was starting to wonder if Mom and Dad might help, but they might be too busy. So just arrange a meeting between yourself and one of your sisters. You did that with Lynn, right? Lincoln then nodded, and he glanced a lot from the info of that one session, even though he didn't like the revelation too much. But it still led him to making decisions to return to his own house. After spending months away from his problems, and even if he did end up striking a chord with his siblings on a much more than one occasion, he doubted they'd risk starting a fight in their therapist's office. He just need to figure out which sister would he speak with next.